The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet suburban neighborhood in Virginia. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink, and the air carried a crispness that hinted at the start of a new day. John Williams, an elderly African-American man, stood on the porch of his small but well-kept home. He had lived in this house for over 40 years, raising his family and building a life filled with hard work and pride. Today, like most mornings, he was sweeping the porch, clearing away the fallen leaves that had gathered overnight. John was a tall man, though age had slightly bent his frame. His hands were calloused from years of labor, and his face bore the lines of someone who had seen both joy and hardship. Despite his frailty, there was a dignity about him that commanded respect. He wore a simple flannel shirt tucked into jeans, and his shoes were scuffed but polished. Around his neck hung a small chain with a dog tag, a memento from his time as a soldier in Vietnam. It was a reminder of the sacrifices he had made, not just for his country, but for his family. As he swept, John hummed a tune softly to himself. It was a habit he had picked up during his years in the military, a way to keep his mind calm and focused. The street was peaceful, with only the occasional chirping of birds breaking the silence. Neighbors were starting to wake up, some opening their windows or stepping outside to grab the morning paper. Everything seemed normal, routine even, but that sense of calm would soon be shattered. A police cruiser turned onto the street, its tires crunching against the pavement. At first, John didn't pay much attention. Police cars weren't uncommon in the area, and he assumed they were simply patrolling the neighborhood. But when the vehicle slowed down and came to a stop directly in front of his house, his heart sank. Something felt off. Two officers stepped out of the car. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with short blonde hair, Officer Kyle, and the other was a younger woman with sharp features and dark hair tied back in a ponytail, Officer Megan. They approached John's house with purpose, their boots clicking against the sidewalk. John stopped sweeping and leaned on the broom, watching them warily. "Good morning," Officer Kyle said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Are you Mr. John Williams?" "Yes, that's me," John replied, his tone polite but cautious. "Can I help you with something, officers?" Officer Megan stepped forward, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Williams, we need to ask you a few questions regarding an incident that occurred last night." John frowned, confusion etched across his face. "An incident? What kind of incident?" "A neighbor reported vandalism to their vehicle," Officer Kyle explained. "According to the report, the damage was done sometime late last night. We've received information suggesting you might have been involved." John's jaw tightened. "Involved? That's ridiculous. I was home all evening. Ask anyone. I haven't left this house since yesterday afternoon." Officer Megan scribbled something on her clipboard before looking up. "We understand, sir, but we still need to investigate. Can you tell us where you were between 9 p.m. and midnight?" "I already told you I was right here," John said, his voice rising slightly. "I watched television, read a bit, and went to bed early. I'm 72 years old, for heaven's sake. Do I really look like someone who goes around vandalizing cars?" The officers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Officer Kyle took a step closer. "Sir, we're not accusing you of anything yet, but we do need to verify your alibi. Is there anyone who can confirm your whereabouts during that time?" John thought for a moment. His daughter lived nearby, but she hadn't visited last night. His closest neighbor, Mrs. Harper, was elderly and rarely stayed awake past 8 o'clock. There was no one who could vouch for him, and he knew how that looked. Still, he refused to let frustration get the better of him. "No, there isn't," he admitted. "But I swear to you, I didn't do whatever it is you think I did." Officer Megan sighed, flipping through the pages on her clipboard. "Unfortunately, without corroboration, we'll have to take you in for further questioning." John's eyes widened in disbelief. "Take me in? For what? You don't have any evidence against me." "It's standard procedure, sir." "Officer," Kyle said, his tone firmer now, "please cooperate or we'll have to use force." Force. The word hit John like a punch to the gut. He had served his country, fought in wars, and endured unimaginable hardships, all to protect people like these officers. And now here he was, being treated like a criminal because of someone's unfounded accusation. Anger bubbled inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help. "Fine," he muttered, setting the broom aside. "If this is how it has to be, then so be it. But mark my words, you're making a mistake." The officers handcuffed him gently but firmly, reading him his rights as they led him to the patrol car. John climbed into the back seat, his hands trembling with indignation. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, he stared out the window at the house he had called home for decades. How could this be happening? To him, of all people. The drive to the precinct was silent, save for the occasional crackle of the radio. John sat rigidly, replaying the events in his mind. Who could have accused him and why? He didn't have enemies, not anymore. Most of his neighbors knew him as a kind, respectable man. Sure, there were disagreements here and there, but nothing serious enough to warrant this kind of treatment. When they arrived at the station, John was ushered inside and placed in a holding cell. The room was cold and sterile, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He sat on the hard bench, staring blankly at the wall. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him. But then he remembered something, or rather, someone. Marcus, his grandson. If anyone could fix this mess, it was Marcus. Summoning what little strength he had left, John called out to the desk sergeant. "Excuse me, I need to make a phone call." The sergeant glanced at him skeptically. "Who are you calling?" "My grandson," John replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "He's a Navy SEAL. Trust me, you'll want to hear what he has to say." The sergeant hesitated, but eventually nodded, handing John the phone. With shaking fingers, John dialed the number. Each ring felt like an eternity. Finally, a familiar voice answered. "Grandpa? What's wrong?" Hearing Marcus's voice brought tears to John's eyes. For the first time since the ordeal began, he allowed himself to feel a sliver of hope. "Marcus, they arrested me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They think I vandalized a car, but it's all a misunderstanding. Please, you have to help me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a low, dangerous tone, Marcus spoke. "Don't worry, Grandpa. I'll handle it." And with those words, John knew that justice would prevail, even if it meant unleashing the wrath of the most deadly Navy SEAL alive. Marcus Williams was thousands of miles away from Virginia when his phone rang. He was stationed in a remote desert outpost, overseeing a covert operation with his team of Navy SEALs. The sun blazed overhead, and the air was thick with heat and dust. Marcus had been crouched behind a crumbling wall, scanning the horizon through binoculars when the call came through. At first, he thought it might be an update from command or a routine check-in, but when he saw his grandfather's name flashing on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. "Grandpa?" Marcus answered immediately, his voice sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" John's voice trembled as he explained what had happened. Marcus listened intently, his grip tightening on the phone. Every word his grandfather spoke made his blood boil. Vandalism? Arrested? It didn't make sense. John Williams wasn't just any man. He was a war hero, a pillar of their community, and the person Marcus admired most in the world. The idea of him being treated like a criminal was unthinkable. "They think I vandalized a car," John said, his frustration evident even over the crackling connection. "But it's all a lie, Marcus. You know me. I wouldn't hurt a fly." "I believe you, Grandpa," Marcus replied, his tone calm but firm. "Tell me exactly what happened." John recounted the details, the officers arriving at his house, their refusal to listen to his explanations, and the humiliating ride to the police station. By the time he finished, Marcus's jaw was clenched so tightly it hurt. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. This wasn't the time for anger, it was the time for action. "Don't worry, Grandpa," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "I'll handle it. No one messes with family." Before hanging up, Marcus asked for the name of the police station and promised to be there as soon as possible. Then, without hesitation, he stood up and signaled to his commanding officer. Lieutenant Harris, a grizzled veteran with decades of experience, approached him with a questioning look. "What's going on, Chief?" Harris asked, noticing the tension in Marcus's posture. It's personal, sir, Marcus replied, his expression unreadable. I need emergency leave. My grandfather has been arrested under false charges and I have to sort this out. Harris raised an eyebrow. Your grandfather? The Vietnam vet? Yes, sir, Marcus confirmed. He's 72 years old, and they're accusing him of vandalism. It's ridiculous. Harris studied Marcus for a moment before nodding. All right, Williams, get out of here, but don't do anything stupid. Your reputation precedes you. Marcus gave a curt nod. Understood, sir. Within hours, Marcus was on a military transport plane heading back to the United States. As the aircraft soared through the sky, Marcus leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. He wasn't just angry. He was furious. His grandfather had sacrificed everything for his country, only to be treated like a criminal by people who were supposed to protect him. Marcus couldn't let that stand. When the plane touched down at a nearby airbase, Marcus wasted no time. He borrowed a vehicle from the base and drove straight to the police station where John was being held. The journey felt endless, every mile stretching longer than the last. Finally, he arrived at the precinct, parking the car with a screech of tires. Stepping out, Marcus adjusted his jacket and walked toward the entrance with purpose. The sight of him drew immediate attention. Marcus wasn't an imposing figure in terms of size. He was lean and wiry, but there was something about him that demanded respect. His piercing eyes, chiseled features, and the confident way he carried himself set him apart. The desk sergeant looked up as Marcus entered, startled by the intensity in his gaze. "Can I help you?" the sergeant asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I'm here for my grandfather, John Williams," Marcus replied, his tone measured but authoritative. "Where is he?" The sergeant hesitated, glancing at the clipboard in front of him. "Are you related to him?" "Yes," Marcus said, pulling out his ID badge. "I'm his grandson, and I'm also a Navy SEAL. Now tell me where he is." The mention of his rank seemed to shake the sergeant into action. "He's in holding cell 3, the man stammered. "But I'll need to verify." Marcus cut him off with a sharp look. "You don't need to verify anything. Take me to him. Now." Reluctantly, the sergeant led Marcus down a narrow hallway to the holding area. As they approached the cell, Marcus spotted his grandfather sitting on a bench, his head bowed and shoulders slumped. For a brief moment, Marcus felt a pang of guilt. John looked older than he remembered, his once strong frame now frail and worn. But despite his appearance, there was still a spark of defiance in his eyes, a trait Marcus had inherited. "Grandpa," Marcus called softly, stepping closer to the bars. John's head snapped up and his face lit up with relief. "Marcus, you came?" "Of course I did," Marcus said, gripping the bars tightly. "I told you I'd handle it. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," John replied, though his voice betrayed his exhaustion. "But this whole thing is absurd. They won't listen to reason." Marcus turned to the sergeant, who was hovering nervously nearby. "Open the cell." "Sir, I can't." The sergeant began, but Marcus interrupted him with a glare. "You can and you will," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. "Unless you want me to explain to your superiors why a decorated war veteran is being detained based on flimsy accusations." The sergeant hesitated again, but the weight of Marcus's presence and his reputation was too much to ignore. With trembling hands, he unlocked the cell door and stepped aside. Marcus entered, kneeling beside his grandfather. "Let's get you out of here," Marcus said, helping John to his feet. "We'll clear this up." As they walked back to the main office, Marcus kept a protective hand on John's shoulder. Officers watched them pass, whispering among themselves. Some recognized Marcus's name. Others didn't need to. They could see the authority radiating from him. When they reached the desk, Marcus turned to the sergeant. "I want to see the evidence against my grandfather," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Every report, every statement, every piece of footage. Right now." The sergeant fumbled with the files, eventually handing over a thin folder. Marcus flipped through it quickly, his brow furrowing as he read. The accusations were vague, relying heavily on hearsay and circumstantial evidence. There were no concrete facts tying John to the crime. Worst of all, the eyewitness account, the supposed proof of John's involvement, was riddled with inconsistencies. "This is garbage," Marcus muttered, slamming the folder shut. "You arrested an elderly man based on this?" "We were following protocol," the sergeant stammered, clearly intimidated. "Protocol?" Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Your protocol got it wrong. My grandfather is innocent and you know it. Whoever accused him needs to answer for this." Before the sergeant could respond, Officer Kyle appeared, his arms crossed and his expression defensive. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus turned to face him, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, there's a problem. You arrested the wrong person, and unless you fix this, things are going to escalate." Kyle bristled at the implied threat. "We're doing our job, sir. If you have evidence proving his innocence, we'll consider it." "Oh, I'll provide evidence," Marcus said, his voice dripping with menace. "But while we're at it, maybe you should explain why a decorated veteran was treated like a common criminal." The tension in the room was palpable. Officers exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to de-escalate the situation. Marcus wasn't raising his voice or making physical threats, but his mere presence was enough to unnerve everyone. He exuded confidence and control, traits honed through years of training and combat. No one dared to challenge him. For John, watching his grandson take charge was both reassuring and humbling. He had always known Marcus was special, destined for greatness. But seeing him in action, calm, calculated, and utterly fearless, filled John with pride. Whatever happened next, he knew Marcus would fight for justice. And with someone like Marcus on his side, John felt invincible. As the standoff continued, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Get me Captain Reynolds," he said, his voice clipped. "This isn't over yet." The phone call to Captain Reynolds didn't take long, but its impact was immediate. Marcus's commanding officer, a no-nonsense man who respected authority and procedure, listened intently as Marcus explained the situation. Though Marcus kept his tone professional, there was an edge to his voice that hinted at barely contained anger. Captain Reynolds knew better than to dismiss Marcus's concerns. This wasn't just any Navy SEAL making demands. It was Marcus Williams, a name synonymous with precision, discipline, and results. "I'll reach out to the local precinct," Captain Reynolds said after a brief pause. "They'll cooperate or they'll answer to higher-ups. You have my word." Marcus ended the call and turned back to the room. The officers, including Kyle and Megan, were still standing awkwardly, unsure of how to proceed. Marcus's presence had shifted the dynamic entirely. What started as a routine investigation had spiraled into something far more serious, and everyone could feel it. "All right," Marcus said, addressing the group. "Here's what's going to happen. My grandfather is innocent, and we're going to prove it. Until then, he's leaving this station with me. If anyone has a problem with that, speak now." No one spoke. The weight of Marcus's reputation, and the implied backing of the military, was enough to silence even the most stubborn voices. Officer Kyle opened his mouth as if to protest, but thought better of it. Instead, he exchanged a glance with Officer Megan, who shrugged helplessly. "Good," Marcus said, nodding once. He turned to John, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Let's go, Grandpa." As they walked toward the exit, the tension in the room lingered. Officers whispered among themselves, some in awe of Marcus's confidence, others uneasy about the potential fallout. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Marcus guided John to the borrowed vehicle and helped him into the passenger seat before climbing behind the wheel. "You handled that well," John said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of pride in his tone. "I've never seen anyone command a room like you did." Marcus glanced at his grandfather, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's part of the job, Grandpa. Leadership is about knowing when to push and when to pull. But don't worry, we're not done yet. We're going to clear your name completely." John nodded, leaning back in his seat. "I trust you, Marcus. Always have." The drive back to John's house was quiet, both men lost in their thoughts. When they arrived, Marcus parked the car and followed John inside. The house was modest but cozy, filled with photographs and mementos from decades of family life. Marcus took a moment to look around, taking in the familiar sights. This place held so many memories: birthday parties, holiday dinners, and countless conversations late into the night. It was home not just for John, but for Marcus, too. "Do you want something to drink?" John asked, heading toward the kitchen. "No thanks," Marcus replied, sitting down at the dining table. "We need to talk strategy. I've already contacted Captain Reynolds, and he's reaching out to the police department. But I want to dig deeper. Who accused you and why?" John sighed, pulling out a chair and sitting across from Marcus. "I don't know who it was. The officers didn't give me a name. All they said was that a neighbor reported seeing someone near the damaged car and assumed it was me." Marcus frowned. "That doesn't add up. Someone accusing you without solid evidence, that's sloppy. Either they're mistaken or they're hiding something." "I agree," John said, his expression thoughtful. "But I can't think of anyone who'd want to hurt me. Most of my neighbors are friendly enough. Sure, there are disagreements here and there, but nothing serious." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "There's always a motive, Grandpa. People act out of fear, jealousy, resentment. It's human nature. Let's start by figuring out who stands to gain from this mess." Just then, the doorbell rang. Startled, John stood up and went to answer it. Standing on the porch was Lisa Carter, a young journalist from the local newspaper. She was in her late 20s, with curly brown hair and a determined glint in her eyes. In one hand, she held a notebook. In the other, a pen. "Mr. Williams?" she asked, her voice polite but eager. "My name is Lisa Carter. I'm with the Virginia Daily. I heard about what happened earlier today and I wanted to get your side of the story." John hesitated, glancing back at Marcus, who had joined him at the door. Marcus stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "Who told you about this?" he asked, his tone sharp. Lisa held up her hand, sensing the hostility. "It's all over social media. Someone posted about the arrest and it blew up quickly. People are talking, Mr. Williams. They're saying this might be a case of racial profiling." Marcus crossed his arms, studying the young woman carefully. "And why does the Virginia Daily care about this?" "It's a local incident, not exactly front page material." Lisa met his gaze steadily. "Because it highlights bigger issues people need to talk about. If your grandfather was wrongfully arrested, that's a story worth telling. But I won't write anything without hearing from him first." John looked at Marcus, silently asking for guidance. Marcus considered the situation for a moment. On one hand, bringing attention to the case could pressure the police into doing the right thing. On the other hand, it could also escalate tensions and make things worse. Still, Marcus trusted his instincts. "Fine," Marcus said finally. "You can ask your questions. But if you twist a single word of what we say, I'll make sure you regret it." Lisa nodded, clearly aware of the stakes. "Understood. Thank you for trusting me." They moved to the living room where Lisa sat down and opened her notebook. For the next hour, she listened intently as John recounted the events of the day. Marcus chimed in occasionally, providing context or clarifying details. By the time the interview was over, Lisa had pages of notes and a clearer understanding of the injustice John had faced. Before leaving, she promised to write an accurate and fair article. "This isn't just about you, Mr. Williams," she said. "It's about holding people accountable and sparking change. I'll do my best to honor that." After Lisa left, Marcus turned to John. "She seems sincere. Her article might actually help us." John nodded, though he looked weary. "I hope so, but I hate being in the spotlight." "I know, Grandpa," Marcus said gently, "but sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Trust me, we'll get through this together." Later that evening, Marcus received a call from Captain Reynolds. The captain had spoken to the police chief, who agreed to review the case thoroughly. However, Reynolds warned Marcus not to expect miracles overnight. Investigations took time, and bureaucracy often slowed things down. "That's fine," Marcus replied. "As long as they're looking into it, that's progress." By the time night fell, Marcus and John had settled into a routine of sorts. They ordered pizza for dinner and spent the evening watching old war movies, a favorite pastime of theirs. Despite the chaos of the day, there was comfort in each other's company. For Marcus, being with his grandfather reminded him of why he fought so hard to protect people like John, who deserved respect and dignity. As they sat side by side on the couch, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced danger countless times in his career, but this was different. This was personal, and he wouldn't rest until justice was served, not just for John, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. Before heading to bed, Marcus made one final call to his team. Though he was on leave, he knew they would support him in any way they could. Within minutes, messages poured in from fellow SEALs offering assistance. Some promised to spread the word online, while others offered to dig up information discreet. Everything Gangshen Liliang. Thanks, guys, Marcus said, smiling despite himself. I'll let you know if I need backup. As he hung up, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. He wasn't alone in this fight. With his grandfather by his side and a network of allies ready to help, he was confident they could overcome anything, even the mistakes of those who had underestimated them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now, Marcus allowed himself a moment of peace. Justice might not come easily, but it would come. And when it did, the world would remember the name John Williams, not as a suspect, but as a hero who deserved better. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, his mind already racing with plans. He had slept on the couch in John's living room, unwilling to leave his grandfather's side until the situation was resolved. As sunlight streamed through the windows, he sat up and stretched, glancing at the clock. It was barely 6 o'clock, but he knew there was no time to waste. Today was the day they would start unraveling the truth. John emerged from his bedroom a short while later, dressed in a clean shirt and slacks. Despite the ordeal of the previous day, he looked more composed, his usual calm demeanor returning. "Morning, Marcus," he said, his voice steady. "You didn't have to stay here, you know. You could have gone back to your place." Marcus shook his head firmly. "Not a chance, Grandpa. I'm not leaving until this is settled." John smiled faintly, appreciating his grandson's loyalty. "All right then. What's the plan for today?" "We're going to dig deeper," Marcus replied, standing and heading to the kitchen. "I want to talk to the neighbors, see if anyone noticed anything unusual last night. And I'll reach out to Lisa Carter again. She might have found something useful by now." While Marcus prepared coffee, John pulled out a small notebook and pen from a drawer. "Let me help," he offered. "I know these streets better than anyone. If someone saw something, I can figure out who to ask." Marcus nodded, handing him a cup of coffee. "That's a good idea. We'll split up after breakfast. But be careful, okay? Don't push yourself too hard." John chuckled softly. "Don't worry about me, son. I've been handling myself long before you were born." Once they finished their meal, Marcus and John stepped outside. The neighborhood was quiet, with only a few residents visible on their porches or tending to their gardens. Marcus decided to start with Mrs. Harper, John's elderly neighbor. She lived 2 houses down and had known the Williams family for decades. If anyone had seen something, it would be her. Knocking gently on her door, Marcus waited patiently until Mrs. Harper answered. She was a frail woman in her 80s, leaning heavily on a cane. Her eyes lit up when she recognized John standing behind Marcus. "John, what are you doing here? I heard about what happened yesterday. It's just awful." "Thank you, Helen," John said warmly. "We're trying to get to the bottom of it. Did you happen to see or hear anything unusual last night?" Mrs. Harper frowned, thinking carefully. "Well, I did hear a car driving by late at night. It sounded loud, like it was speeding. But I didn't see who it was. I was already in bed." "That's helpful," Marcus said, jotting down the detail in his notebook. "Do you remember what time that was?" "Around 10:30, maybe 11, Mrs. House replied. "Sorry, I can't tell you more." "It's all right," Marcus assured her. "Every little bit helps." After thanking Mrs. Harper, Marcus and John continued their rounds, speaking to other neighbors. Some recalled hearing noises but couldn't provide specific details. Others admitted they hadn't paid much attention. Still, Marcus remained patient, knowing that even small pieces of information could add up to something significant. Meanwhile, Lisa Carter had been working tirelessly on her article. She had spent hours reviewing police reports, interviewing local activists, and gathering statements from community members. By mid-morning, she sent Marcus a text. "Got something big. Can we meet?" Marcus replied immediately, "Yes. Where?" They agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. When Marcus arrived, Lisa was sitting at a corner table, her laptop open and papers spread out in front of her. She waved him over, her expression serious but excited. "I think I found the person who accused your grandfather," Lisa said, without preamble. "It's a man named Greg Peterson. He lives 3 blocks away from John's house." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Why would he accuse my grandfather? Do you know anything about him?" Lisa nodded, sliding a printed document across the table. "Greg has a history of disputes with John. Apparently they argued a few months ago over property lines. Greg claimed John's tree branches were encroaching on his yard. Things got heated, but nothing came of it. So he holds a grudge," Marcus muttered, scanning the document. "This doesn't prove he vandalized the car, but it gives us motive." "There's more," Lisa added. "I checked security footage from a nearby store. It shows Greg walking near the damaged car around the time of the incident. He's wearing dark clothes and a hoodie. Hardly conclusive, but suspicious." Marcus clenched his jaw, anger simmering beneath the surface. "This is enough to raise questions. Thanks, Lisa. You've done great work." Lisa smiled slightly. "Just doing my job. Let me know if you need anything else." As Marcus left the cafe, his mind was spinning. The evidence wasn't ironclad yet, but it was a start. He called John to update him, then headed straight to the police station. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought Lisa's findings with him, determined to make the officers listen. When Marcus arrived, he requested a meeting with the lead investigator, Detective Harris. The detective was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a skeptical expression. He listened as Marcus laid out the new information, occasionally scribbling notes. "This is compelling," Detective Harris admitted after a moment. "But it's still circumstantial. We'll need more to reopen the case officially. Then get more," Marcus said sharply. "Talk to Greg Peterson, review the security footage, do your job properly this time." Detective Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Mr. Williams, I understand how frustrating this must be. But investigations take time. Rushing won't help anyone." Marcus leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. "My grandfather is innocent. Every second you waste is another second he's treated like a criminal. Don't make me remind you who I am and who I know." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Detective Harris hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, I'll look into it, but don't expect miracles overnight." By the end of the day, word of Lisa's article began spreading online. Titled, "Elderly Veteran Wrongfully Accused. A Call for Justice," the piece highlighted John's service record, the lack of evidence against him, and the potential racial bias in the arrest. Social media exploded with reactions, ranging from outrage to support. Local activists organized protests outside the police station, demanding accountability and reform. Back at home, John watched the news coverage with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was grateful for the support. On the other, he disliked being the center of attention. "I never wanted any of this," he told Marcus quietly. "All I wanted was to live peacefully." "I know, Grandpa," Marcus replied, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "But sometimes change starts with people like you. You're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly." John nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "I hope it's worth it." "It will be," Marcus said firmly. "I promise." As the days passed, the pressure on the police department grew. Detective Harris interviewed Greg Peterson, who denied any involvement in the vandalism, but struggled to explain why he had been near the car that night. Meanwhile, additional security footage surfaced, showing a shadowy figure matching Greg's description fleeing the scene shortly after the damage occurred. With each new development, the case against John weakened. Finally, after nearly a week of relentless effort, the police chief issued a public apology, acknowledging the mistakes made during the investigation. Charges against John were dropped, and an internal review was launched to address procedural failures. For Marcus and John, the victory was bittersweet. While justice had been served, the experience left scars that wouldn't fade easily. Yet amidst the turmoil, they found strength in each other, and in the knowledge that they had stood up for what was right. As they sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sunset, Marcus broke the silence. "We did good, Grandpa. People are paying attention now. Change might not happen overnight, but it'll come." John smiled faintly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, it will. Because of people like you, Marcus. You remind me of why I fought so hard all those years ago." Marcus squeezed his grandfather's shoulder, feeling a deep sense of pride. They had faced adversity and emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as a family. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of home and the promise of a brighter future, they knew they could overcome anything life threw their way. The days following the police department's apology were a whirlwind of emotions for John and Marcus. While the charges had been dropped, the ordeal wasn't entirely over. The community was still buzzing with conversations about what had happened, and John found himself at the center of it all. Neighbors who had once nodded politely in passing now stopped to shake his hand or offer heartfelt apologies. Local activists invited him to speak at rallies, hoping to turn his story into a catalyst for change. It was overwhelming, but John handled it with grace, knowing that his experience could help others. Marcus stayed by his grandfather's side throughout, ensuring he wasn't alone during interviews or public appearances. Though he preferred to stay in the background, Marcus occasionally stepped forward when reporters pressed too hard or when someone tried to downplay the seriousness of the situation. His presence was a quiet reminder that John wasn't just any man, he was a war hero with a family that included one of the most respected Navy SEALs in the country. Few dared to cross Marcus, and those who did quickly backed down. One morning, as they sat together on the porch drinking coffee, Lisa Carter arrived unexpectedly. She carried a stack of newspapers under her arm, her face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Williams, you're making headlines again," she said, handing one to John. The front page featured a photo of him standing beside Marcus outside the police station with the headline, "Justice Prevails. Elderly Veteran Cleared After." "False arrest." John skimmed the article, his expression unreadable. "It's strange seeing my name in print like this," he admitted after a moment. "I never wanted attention. I just wanted the truth to come out." Lisa smiled sympathetically. "Sometimes attention is how we create change. Your story has sparked important discussions about accountability and fairness. People are listening because of you." Marcus, leaning against the railing, crossed his arms. "And what happens next? Will the department actually follow through on their promises?" "They've already started reviewing their policies," Lisa replied. "There's talk of mandatory bias training and stricter guidelines for arrests based on eyewitness accounts. But reforms take time. What matters now is keeping the pressure on." John nodded thoughtfully. "If speaking up helps prevent this from happening to someone else, then I'll do it. But I won't let it consume me. I've lived long enough to know life is too short for bitterness." His words struck a chord with both Lisa and Marcus. For all his strength and resilience, John had an uncanny ability to forgive, an attribute Marcus deeply admired. It wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, born from years of hardship and reflection. Later that afternoon, Detective Harris paid them a visit. He stood awkwardly on the porch, clutching his hat in his hands. "Mr. Williams?" he began, his voice hesitant. "I wanted to apologize personally. What happened to you was wrong, and I take full responsibility for not catching the mistakes sooner." John studied the man carefully before responding. "Apologies are easy. Actions matter more. Are you going to make sure this doesn't happen again?" Detective Harris nodded earnestly. "Yes, sir. We're implementing new protocols and I've been assigned to oversee the changes. It's not much, but it's a start." Marcus stepped forward, his tone measured but firm. Good. Because if anything like this happens again, I won't be so forgiving. The detective swallowed visibly but held Marcus's gaze. Understood, Chief Williams. Thank you for your patience, and for pushing us to do better. After Detective Harris left, John turned to Marcus with a wry smile. You really do have a way of intimidating people, don't you? It's part of the job, Marcus replied with a shrug. But intimidation only works if there's respect behind it. They know we're serious, and that's what counts. As the week went on, John began settling back into his routine. He resumed sweeping the porch each morning, tending to his garden, and taking leisurely walks around the neighborhood. Yet things weren't quite the same. Strangers approached him regularly, thanking him for standing up against injustice. Some shared their own stories of being mistreated by authorities, while others simply expressed admiration for his courage. John listened patiently, offering words of encouragement whenever he could. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Marcus broached a topic he'd been thinking about for days. Grandpa, have you ever considered writing your story? Not just about this incident, but everything, your service in Vietnam, raising Mom and Uncle Robert, building this life. People need to hear it. John chuckled softly, shaking his head. I'm no writer, Marcus. Besides, who would want to read about an old man's memories? A lot of people, Marcus countered. Your experiences shaped who you are, and they've inspired so many, including me. If you're willing, I can help. We could even collaborate with Lisa. She's good at telling stories. John fell silent, staring out at the horizon. The idea intrigued him, though it also made him uneasy. Writing about his past meant revisiting painful memories, things he had worked hard to leave behind. Still, the thought of leaving a legacy for future generations gave him pause. I'll think about it, he said finally. But if I do, it'll be on my terms. No sugarcoating, no exaggerations. Just the truth. That's all anyone could ask for, Marcus said with a smile. And I'll be right here to support you every step of the way. The following Saturday, Marcus organized a small gathering at John's house. Friends, neighbors, and members of the local veterans group came together to celebrate John's exoneration and honor his decades of service. The backyard was decorated with American flags, and a barbecue grill smoked with burgers and hot dogs. Laughter filled the air as people mingled, sharing stories and enjoying the warm spring weather. At one point, Marcus stood up and raised a glass. To my grandfather, he said, his voice carrying across the yard. A man of integrity, strength, and humility. You taught me what it means to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Today we celebrate not just your freedom but your spirit, a spirit that refuses to back down. Cheers to you, Grandpa. Everyone clapped and cheered, raising their glasses in unison. John, seated at the center of the gathering, looked around at the smiling faces and felt a swell of gratitude. For all the challenges he had faced, he realized how blessed he truly was, to have a loving family, supportive friends, and a grandson who embodied the best of humanity. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus pulled John aside. How are you feeling? He asked gently. John sighed, his eyes shining with emotion. Tired, but happy. This whole thing has reminded me of something important. No matter how dark things get, there's always light somewhere. Sometimes you just need someone to shine it for you. The weeks that followed the gathering at John's house brought a sense of calm and renewal. Life in the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm, but the impact of what had happened lingered. John's story continued to inspire people far beyond Virginia. Articles, interviews, and social media posts kept the conversation alive, shining a light on issues of justice, accountability, and fairness. For John, it was both humbling and exhausting, but he approached it with the same quiet dignity that defined him. Marcus stayed close during this time, ensuring his grandfather wasn't overwhelmed by the attention. He fielded calls from reporters, coordinated with Lisa Carter to manage public appearances, and even helped John draft responses to the flood of letters they received. Some were from strangers thanking John for his courage, others came from veterans sharing their own struggles. Each message reinforced how deeply John's experience resonated with people. One afternoon, as they sorted through the mail, Marcus held up an envelope marked with official-looking stamps. "This one's from the mayor," he said, handing it to John. John opened it carefully, unfolding the letter inside. It was an invitation to attend a city council meeting where officials planned to honor him with a certificate of recognition. The letter praised his resilience and contributions to the community, calling him a symbol of hope and perseverance. "I don't know about this," John murmured, setting the letter down. "I'm not sure I want to be paraded around like some kind of hero." "You are a hero, Grandpa," Marcus replied firmly. "And if accepting this helps keep the conversation going, then it's worth it. But it's your decision." After some thought, John agreed to attend the ceremony. On the day of the event, Marcus accompanied him to City Hall, where a modest crowd had gathered. Local leaders spoke about John's service and the lessons his story offered. When it was his turn to speak, John stepped up to the podium, gripping the edges tightly. "I didn't ask for any of this," he began, his voice steady but soft. "All I wanted was to live my life in peace. But sometimes peace is interrupted, not because we choose it, but because others make choices for us. What happened to me shouldn't have happened to anyone, and while it's good to see change starting, we can't stop here. Justice isn't just about fixing mistakes, it's about preventing them in the first place." The room erupted in applause, and John stepped back, visibly relieved to have finished speaking. Later, as they walked out of the building, Marcus glanced at him. "That was perfect, Grandpa. You nailed it." John chuckled softly. "Let's hope it makes a difference." Summer approached. John began working on the idea Marcus had suggested earlier, writing his story. With Lisa Carter's guidance and Marcus's encouragement, he started piecing together memories from his childhood, military service, and life after returning home. It wasn't easy. Revisiting certain moments brought back pain and sadness. But John found solace in knowing that sharing his experiences might help others feel less alone. Marcus often joined him during these writing sessions, listening intently as John recounted tales of bravery and loss. Sometimes he'd offer suggestions or ask questions to clarify details. Other times he'd simply sit quietly, letting John work through his thoughts. The bond between grandfather and grandson grew stronger with each passing day, forged not only by shared blood but by mutual respect and understanding. Lisa visited regularly to review drafts and provide feedback. "You have a gift for storytelling, Mr. Williams," she told him one evening. "Your words carry weight because they're real. People will connect with them." John smiled faintly. "If even one person reads this and feels inspired to stand up for themselves, or someone else, then it'll be worth it." By late summer, the manuscript was nearly complete. John titled it, "Through the Fire, A Life of Service and Survival," a nod to both his military past and his recent ordeal. Publishers showed immediate interest, eager to share his story with a wider audience. Though the process of editing and publishing would take months, John felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in years. Meanwhile, Marcus prepared to return to active duty. His leave was coming to an end, and though he dreaded leaving John behind, he knew his grandfather was in good hands. The community had rallied around him, offering support and friendship. Neighbors checked in regularly, and local veterans groups invited John to join their meetings. He had become a beloved figure not just for his courage but for his kindness and wisdom. On Marcus's final night in town, they sat together on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. "I hate saying goodbye," Marcus admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "You're not saying goodbye," John corrected gently. "You're just heading back to work. And besides, you'll visit soon enough." "I will," Marcus promised. "But it won't be the same without you there." John reached over, patting Marcus's knee. "You've done more for me than I could ever repay. Now go do what you do best, protecting people who need it. Just don't forget where home is." "I won't," Marcus said, his eyes glistening. "Not ever." The next morning, Marcus packed his bags and hugged John tightly before driving away. As the car disappeared down the street, John stood on the porch, waving until he could no longer see the taillights. Though he missed Marcus already, He felt a deep sense of pride knowing that his grandson was out in the world, making a difference. In the months that followed, John threw himself into promoting his book. He gave interviews, attended book signings, and spoke at schools and community centers. Everywhere he went, people greeted him with warmth and admiration. His story touched hearts, sparking conversations about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Lisa remained a constant presence, helping John navigate the demands of his newfound fame. "You've become a role model," she told him one day. "Not just for veterans, but for everyone who's faced adversity." "I never set out to be a role model," John replied with a chuckle. "I just tried to live my life the best way. I knew how. And that's exactly why people look up to you," Lisa said with a smile. As autumn arrived, painting the trees in shades of red and gold, John reflected on everything that had happened. The false arrest, the fight for justice, the outpouring of support. It had all changed him in ways he couldn't have imagined. Yet amidst the chaos, he had discovered something profound: the power of community, the strength of family, and the enduring impact of doing what's right. One crisp October evening, as he sat on the porch reading letters from readers, John felt a deep sense of contentment. His life had been full of challenges, but it had also been rich with love, purpose, and meaning. He thought about Marcus, serving his country with the same unwavering dedication that John had once shown. He thought about the neighbors who had rallied around him, proving that kindness still existed in abundance. And he thought about the countless strangers whose lives he had unknowingly touched. For John Williams, the future was uncertain, as it always was. But one thing was clear: no matter what lay ahead, he would face it with the same courage and grace that had carried him through every storm. Because in the end, life wasn't about avoiding hardship, it was about rising above it, together.